He was once hailed as the next big thing in hip-hop, charting with platinum singles, partying with industry elites. But behind the flashy music videos and club anthems was a dark and disgusting truth. John Michael Hakeem Gibson, better known as rapper Cash Out, wasn't just making hits. He was building a human trafficking ring, grooming vulnerable women, selling their bodies. And today, the music stops. Because Cash Out has just been found guilty of violating Georgia's RICO Act, the same law used to take down the mafia. And now, his victims are finally speaking out, and their voices are louder than any beat he ever dropped. Trigger warning. This episode contains graphic details related to human trafficking, exploitation, coercion, and the emotional impact of abuse. If you are a survivor or someone currently healing from sexual violence, exploitation, or trafficking, please take care while listening. This content is not for shock value. It's to shed light, to speak truth, and to honor those who were silenced. If you or someone you love needs help, please contact National Human Trafficking Hotline 1-888-37-37-888. RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network 1-800-656-4673. National Domestic Violence Hotline 1-800-799-7233. You are not alone. Help is available. Healing is real, and your story matters. John Michael Hakeem Gibson, known in the music world as Cash Out, once stood under the bright lights of hip-hop's biggest stages. His 2011 single Cashin' Out was more than a hit. It was a movement. He was seen as Atlanta's next rising star, a rapper backed by epic records, mentored by DJ Spins, and buzzing on every major hip-hop blog. With catchy hooks and club-ready beats, he presented himself as another young black man who'd made it out. But what most people didn't know, what nobody in the mainstream industry wanted to admit, was that Cash Out was allegedly running a criminal enterprise behind closed doors. This wasn't about drugs or guns. It wasn't a storyline about hustling to survive. This was human trafficking. This was coercion. This was slavery. And he was the master of manipulation. The district attorney's office in Georgia laid out a case so disturbing that even veteran prosecutors described it as, honestly, one of the most severe and sickening trafficking cases we've ever prosecuted under the RICO statute. And yes, you heard that right. This wasn't just a series of isolated crimes. Cash Out was found guilty under Georgia's RICO Act, a statute usually reserved for organized crime families, gang leaders, and corporate corruption. Because that's what this was, a criminal organization. Not just one man abusing power, but a network built to profit off women's bodies. According to the 41-count indictment, Cash Out was the leader of a trafficking operation that used violence, drugs, psychological manipulation, and fear to trap women into selling their bodies. He lured them with promises of fame, money, and luxury. And when they tried to leave, he used beatings, threats, and isolation to keep them under control. His music career wasn't just a cover. It was the bait, the fake record deals, the empty studio dreams, the lavish hotel rooms where women were allegedly trafficked, the social media persona, the jewelry, the fast cars. It was all part of the same script, and the system let it play out like a reality show until the charges finally hit. But by the time Cash Out was indicted, how many girls had already lost everything? How many women had been sold, passed around, discarded, their identities erased, their dignity shattered? This wasn't just about Cash Out's crimes. This was about the dark underbelly of an entire culture. A culture that profits from silence. A culture that lets predators hide behind platinum plaques. A culture where young girls are disposable and rapists get record deals. And while the world danced to his beats, his victims were trapped in a nightmare. One they're still healing from today. This wasn't just a man committing crimes in isolation. This was a family operation. A generational betrayal that turned motherhood and cousinhood into tools of exploitation. When the Georgia authorities unveiled the full RICO indictment against John Michael Gibson, Cash Out, they did more than accuse a rapper of human trafficking. They pulled back the curtain on an entire network. One that included not just hired hands or street-level associates, but his own blood. According to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, Cash Out's own mother, Linda Smith, and his cousin, Donovan Thomas Jr., were both actively involved in the operation. Linda wasn't just aware of what her son was doing, she was allegedly helping him manage the trafficking ring. Let that sink in. The very woman who brought him into this world, who should have protected every young woman she saw being pulled into her son's orbit, was instead accused of enabling their suffering. Prosecutors claim she helped collect money, coordinate transportation, and even acted as a handler, allegedly keeping the girls under control when Cash Out wasn't present. There are reports that she also used her position as a mother figure to build false trust with the victims, only to manipulate them deeper into the web. And then there was his cousin. Donovan Thomas wasn't a silent bystander either. Investigators allege that he not only knew about the trafficking, but assisted in the logistics, the hotels, the surveillance, the payouts. He helped maintain the illusion that these women were choosing their lifestyle, when in fact, they were being groomed, threatened, and controlled by force and emotional terrorism. At the heart of the case were multiple women who bravely came forward, most of them in their early 20s, describing a horror house of psychological warfare, sexual coercion, and trauma bonding. They testified that Cash Out used designer drugs to numb them, lavish gifts to lure them, and brutality to silence them. The indictment revealed that he beat one of the women so badly, she was left permanently disfigured. She was hospitalized with broken bones. Another woman said he choked her until she passed out. And when she awoke, he told her that she belonged to him. Not figuratively, not romantically. "You're mine now," he said. "You can't leave." The charges included racketeering, aggravated assault, trafficking for sexual servitude, kidnapping, and false imprisonment. And still, for years, this continued. Why? Because Cash Out's music career gave him just enough shine to distract the public, just enough celebrity to get the benefit of the doubt, just enough misogyny embedded in the culture for people to look the other way. And now, finally, in a courtroom in Georgia, the truth has come out. A RICO guilty verdict has been delivered. Not just against a failed rapper, but against a system of cruelty, held up by his mother, his cousin, and every enabler in between. And in the shadows of that courtroom, the survivors, the young women whose lives were shattered. Chaki Bar de Katil to pick up the pieces. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from peace, but the kind that falls like a heavy curtain after a war has ended. The kind of silence where grief breathes louder than justice. And then the victims stood, one by one. Voices that had been silenced, bought, brutalized, and hidden, finally spoke. One woman, who was just 19 when she first met Cash Out, stood with trembling hands. She told the court He told me I was special. He told me I was going to be famous, that I was chosen. But what he really meant was that I was chosen to be broken. He stole my body, my voice, my dignity. I wake up every night still hearing the door slam behind me when he locked me in. She paused, took a breath, and looked directly at Gibson, her former trafficker. You tried to erase me, but I'm still here, and today you lose your power. The room cracked open with emotion. The prosecutor stood still. The judge looked down, barely able to hide the weight of what had just been said. Another survivor, her voice raw with fury, recounted the psychological torment she endured. He beat me because I said I was tired. He beat me because I said no. He beat me because I asked to go home. He beat me because I wanted to live. She described how she was given pills she didn't understand, filmed in compromising situations she never consented to, and then trafficked across state lines. Her trafficker? A man the world knew as a rapper. A man who bragged in lyrics about breaking in women and owning everything he touches. But in reality, he was breaking humans, not just laws. Another survivor, barely in her 20s, didn't speak as long. Her voice cracked early on, but she kept going. Her pain cut through every ear in the room. I don't know who I was before I met him, but I know who I am now. I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor, and he doesn't get to define my story anymore. These were not isolated statements. There were multiple women, each with their own story of being lured in, manipulated, and slowly stripped of their autonomy. Some described being locked in rooms for days without food. Others were forced to perform acts for money that they never saw. One woman, just 17 at the time, said she was promised a modeling contract, only to be sold to men twice her age. She was told to smile, told to cooperate, told that if she didn't, her family back home would suffer. These are not just sad anecdotes. These are war crimes committed in peacetime, right here on American soil, under the watchful eye of a justice system that too often looks away. But not this time. For once, the women were heard, and their words, brutal, beautiful, and brave, now live forever in the court record, a testament to their strength, and a warning to every trafficker still operating in the dark. We see you, and we will not be quiet anymore. To understand how someone like John Michael Hakeem Gibson, cash out, could build an empire on the backs of broken women, we have to stop asking why and start asking how. Because this isn't just about one man. This is about a pipeline, a well-oiled machine of exploitation that runs straight through Georgia and other southern states, often unnoticed, often unchallenged, because the victims don't look like who society wants to protect. Atlanta, Georgia, the very city where Cash Out built his music persona, is now widely known as one of the top trafficking hubs in the United States. And that's not an exaggeration. Reports from the Urban Institute, the FBI, and the Department of Justice have all shown that trafficking in Atlanta generates an estimated $290 million a year. That number is not just a statistic. That number is blood money, earned through rape, manipulation, captivity, and the silencing of women and girls, most of them black and brown. How did it get this way? Because Georgia, like many parts of the South, sits at the crossroads of racial capitalism, interstate commerce, weak enforcement, and a music industry that, honestly, often glorifies domination, submission, and silence. Traffickers thrive in places where tourism and big events are common. Super Bowls, music festivals, professional sports games, and Atlanta, well, it hosts them all. The airport is one of the busiest in the world. The highways stretch in every direction. And the laws? They've historically been weak, inconsistent, and, yeah, shamefully uninterested in the invisible women who cry behind hotel room doors. The truth is, trafficking for prostitution doesn't look like the movies. It's not always chains and dungeons. It's often hotels and condos, designer bags and fake promises, a phone taken away, a family never contacted again, a girl from foster care who thinks she met a boyfriend on Instagram. And 2 weeks later, she's being sold across state lines. Many of these women don't even realize they're victims until it's too late, because traffickers like Cash Out use emotional warfare. They manipulate. They love bomb. They groom. And the music industry. Far too often, it rewards this behavior. It lifts these men up, gives them platforms, turns them into role models. Meanwhile, their victims are erased, or worse, blamed. It's no coincidence that The same state where Cash Out built his trafficking ring is also where other high-profile sex trafficking cases have emerged, some involving lesser-known rappers, promoters, and even law enforcement officers. That's right. In many trafficking busts in Georgia, off-duty officers, security guards, and even probation workers have been caught soliciting or protecting traffickers. The system is not broken. It was built this way, built to protect power, built to excuse violence when it's wrapped in fame, and built to ignore pain when it comes from the mouths of poor women, marginalized women, and Black women. Let's be very clear. Trafficking is not a foreign problem. It's not happening somewhere else. It is happening right here in southern towns, in gated communities, in recording studios, in Airbnbs, in luxury apartments, in churches, in strip clubs, in places where people have been conditioned not to question what's behind the closed door, not to believe the girl who says she's scared, and not to look too closely at what a manager really means. And even now, even after a guilty verdict, Cash Out is not the only one who should be held accountable. Where were the hotel managers who saw underage girls being rotated in and out of rooms and said nothing? Where were the booking agents who saw these women crying backstage and chose to protect the brand instead of the person? Where were the label executives who knew what kind of man they were cutting checks for, but prioritized streams over safety? And where is the community outrage when these girls, many of whom grew up in poverty, in foster care, in broken school systems, disappear and no Amber Alert ever goes out? We have to face an ugly truth. The trafficking of women in Georgia is not an accident. It's a system, a profit model, and it's being sustained by our silence. The fall of Cash Out is not the end of this story. It's the beginning of accountability and the blueprint to tear this system down. The guilty verdict against John Michael Gibson, also known as Cash Out, was a necessary moment of accountability. The fact that a celebrity, backed by money, music, and influence, was finally convicted under Georgia's RICO Act for human trafficking is a sign that some part of the legal machine can still deliver justice. Prosecutors in this case were aggressive, determined, and unrelenting. They connected the dots. They listened to the victims. They treated this case as what it was: organized exploitation, not a misunderstanding between consenting adults, not a salacious tabloid scandal, but a violent, strategic crime enterprise. And for that, we must give credit where it's due. The prosecution treated these women as human beings, not as unreliable witnesses or disposable bodies. That matters. They elevated the survivor testimonies to the level of truth, and they leaned into the patterns of abuse rather than treating each incident like a separate puzzle piece. That strategy is what allowed the RICO charges to stick. It was a rare moment when the law rose to meet the truth. But let's not fool ourselves. For every cash out that is convicted, there are hundreds of traffickers walking free. And for every woman who survives long enough to testify, there are thousands who never make it to court because the justice system has failed them from the very start. Let's talk about what the system still gets tragically wrong. First, victim credibility is constantly weaponized. Survivors of trafficking are often dismissed by police, ridiculed in court, or attacked by defense attorneys who paint them as liars, gold diggers, or unstable addicts. Their trauma responses, things like memory gaps, emotional shutdown, or even returning to their trafficker out of fear, are used against them as evidence of dishonesty. We have to ask, how many women don't come forward at all because they've seen what happens when others try? Second, many trafficking victims are criminalized before they are recognized as victims. Across Georgia, and that is the broader South, there are girls who have been arrested for prostitution when they were actually being trafficked. Minors, mind you. And instead of being offered protection, they were thrown into juvenile detention centers or county jails. Meanwhile, their abusers walk away, free, unnamed, untouched. Third, there's the horrific delay in prosecution. Cash outs crimes didn't start in 2022 or 2023. Survivors say these patterns went on for years, long before the courts ever took them seriously. Why did it take so long? Why was this man able to tour, profit, and post on social media with no restrictions while vulnerable women were left in his shadow? What resources were not made available? How many tips were ignored? How many red flags were buried because the man behind them had fame? And then there's the lack of aftercare. Even when convictions are secured, then what? Where is the ongoing support for the survivors? Do they get trauma counseling, housing, job training, or are they simply expected to move on now that the media is done with their story? The reality is this: the justice system is reactive, not proactive. It doesn't rescue. It waits. It waits until there's enough blood, enough tears, enough broken bones, enough headlines. Then it moves, often slowly, often reluctantly. And even then, it may not protect the most important thing: the dignity and long-term healing of the survivor. Yes, the verdict against Cash Out was important, but it's not a win until every trafficking victim, regardless of race, income, or background, is treated with the same urgency and humanity as the ones who made it into this courtroom. The system cannot keep pretending that trafficked women are complicit or at fault just because they didn't fit into a perfect victim mold. We cannot call this justice until the entire culture of disbelief and disrespect toward Black and brown survivors is dismantled. From the streets to the courthouses to the sentencing tables. Until then, this victory remains a rare exception in a system still buried in denial. Let's be honest. Cash Out didn't just fall through the cracks. He was celebrated while operating in plain sight. He was the product of an industry that has long blurred the line between artistry and abuse. The real tragedy is not just what he did. It's that we watched it happen, album after album, post after post, and called it branding. From the beginning of his career, Cash Out built an image rooted in hypermasculinity, domination, and sexual control. His lyrics were full of violence, disguised as affection. Talking about owning women, breaking them in, and making them work. And we let it slide. Because it rhymed. Because it slapped in the club. Because we've been conditioned to see women, especially Black women, as background characters in someone else's story. This is not unique to Cash Out. The music industry has long been a breeding ground for exploitation, especially in hip-hop and rap, where young women are often treated as disposable accessories in music videos, tour buses, and backstage deals. It's not a coincidence that so many cases of grooming, coercion, and trafficking are tied to men in entertainment. The power imbalance is extreme. The money silences the dissent, and the culture itself rewards the worst behaviors with streams, followers, and brand deals. But it doesn't stop there. Social media has only made things worse. Apps like Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat have become modern-day hunting grounds for traffickers. Predators don't need to lurk in alleys anymore. They scroll your feed, learn your insecurities, and slide into your DMs with sweet words and false promises. A music producer, a promoter, a casting director. That's all it takes. One message, one compliment. And suddenly, a teenager who just wanted to be seen is caught in a spiral of grooming and exploitation. And, we have to ask ourselves, why do so many young girls fall for it? Because society glorifies the very tools of their destruction. We tell girls that success is being chosen by a man with money, that struggle is romantic, that jealousy is love, that if a man controls you, he must care. Our culture, through music, media, and even reality TV, teaches girls that their worth is tied to how desired they are, how ride or die they can be, and how much pain they're willing to endure in silence. And if they speak out, they're called liars, groupies, hoes, attention seekers, gold diggers. Meanwhile, the men behind the abuse, the real predators, are rebranded as troubled geniuses, misunderstood artists, or simply victims of cancel culture. Let's call it what it is: a culture of complicity. Music labels know what's happening. They see the girls at the studio who don't belong there. They see the NDAs, the hush money, the don't ask policies. Promoters know, club owners know, even fans often know. And yet, everyone looks the other way because the beat is good, the artist is hot, and nobody wants to lose their spot. But we lose something bigger when we allow this to go on. We lose generations of girls who never get to dream freely. We lose the integrity of our communities. We lose the ability to tell truth from trauma, fantasy from fact. And we lose our humanity, little by little, each time we hear a woman cry and say, well, she probably knew what she was getting into. We are not blameless. We are not separate. When we dance to misogyny, when we repost toxicity, when we defend abusers because they're talented, we are fueling the same fire that burned these women's lives to ash. It's not enough to cancel one man. We have to cancel the entire mindset that made him possible. When John Michael Hakeem Gibson, known to the world as Cash Out, stood before the court to speak before his sentencing, he didn't take the opportunity to apologize. He didn't speak to the women whose lives he shattered. He didn't acknowledge the fear, the manipulation, or the trauma. Instead, he delivered a carefully crafted, deflective statement that lasted more than 10 minutes, filled with denial, deflection, and dangerous delusion. He told the judge he believed the jury made a wrong judgment, thanking them for their time, but insisting they had misunderstood who he truly was. He claimed he had never coerced anyone, that all of the women involved were grown, and that nothing he did was forced. He insinuated that the witnesses had been pressured to testify against him, that this case wasn't about trafficking, but about targeting someone at the top. And then, in a moment that chilled the room, he invoked religion. He compared himself to Jesus, saying that Christ too had been falsely accused and that he believed the Most High would vindicate him in time. But this wasn't redemption. This wasn't a spiritual trial. This was the sentencing of a man convicted of trafficking, coercion, rape, and aggravated assault, crimes with real victims, real scars, and lifelong consequences. His words were not those of a man ready to face justice. They were the final act of someone who still believed his charisma could erase the truth. Even in the face of overwhelming evidence, multiple survivor testimonies, and a courtroom filled with pain, Cash Out centered himself. But when his words ended, the judge's words began. And they were sharp, final, and devastating. Cash Out was sentenced to 2 life terms, one for rape and one for aggravated sodomy, to be served concurrently. But that wasn't all. He was also given an additional 75 years in prison, 20 years for each count of sex trafficking, 20 years for racketeering under the Georgia RICO Act, 5 years for possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, and concurrent time for various supporting offenses. He was ordered to register as a SMEX offender, have no contact with his victims, and is permanently banned from returning to the locations where his crimes took place. But he didn't act alone. His own mother, Linda Smith, also known by those in his inner circle as Mama Cash, was sentenced to 30 years in prison. That included 20 years for racketeering and 10 consecutive years for her role in the trafficking ring. She, too, must register as a SMEX offender and was barred from having any contact with victims or setting foot near any of the known trafficking locations. And his cousin, Tyrone Taylor, received one of the harshest sentences: 2 life terms for rape and aggravated sodomy, plus an additional 60 years for sex trafficking, assault, drug possession, false imprisonment, and more. He was labeled a predator by the court and is also required to register as a SMEX offender for life. The judge made it clear. These were not isolated incidents or misunderstandings. This was a calculated, organized, and sustained criminal enterprise, one that targeted vulnerable women and exploited them for profit under the illusion of glamour, love, and opportunity. And now, the very system that Cash Out thought he could manipulate has sentenced him to a life where no spotlight will ever shine again. There was no redemption in his words. There was no accountability in his voice. And there was certainly no justice in his heart. But the gavel came down anyway, not just on a man, but on a machine of exploitation that ran unchecked for far too long. Now that the sentences have been handed down and the headlines begin to fade, the most important part of the story begins: the healing. Not for the abusers who cried for leniency, not for the image-obsessed culture that allowed them to thrive, but for the survivors, for the women who walked through hell and lived to speak their truth, for every person who has ever been groomed, coerced, silenced, or broken by someone who was protected by power, money, or fame. This is for you. Healing doesn't come easy. It doesn't come in one therapy session or with one court victory. It comes in waves, in flashbacks, in quiet moments of panic, in trying to rebuild a sense of self when your identity was stripped down to someone else's fantasy. It's hard. It's messy, but it's possible. And it starts with telling the truth. Without shame, without silence, without apology. We must begin having real conversations, not just with survivors, but with our communities. We need to talk to our daughters about the early signs of grooming, the lies predators tell, and the difference between love and control. We need to stop sugarcoating manipulation as passion. We need to teach our girls that their worth is not defined by how many men desire them, or how loyal they are to someone who disrespects their boundaries. And just as importantly, we need to talk to our boys, not just about consent, but about character, about what it truly means to honor a woman's voice, her body, her no, and her soul. And for women listening who have been through it, who never told anyone, who left and went back, who are still healing in silence, I want you to hear this loud and clear. You are not your trauma. You are not what was done to you. You are not dirty. You are not weak. You are not less than. You are someone who survived. And that survival is sacred. Rebuilding from ruin takes time. It takes resources. It takes sisterhood. It takes community that doesn't just post about survivors in October and forget them by November. It takes showing up, speaking out, and standing beside those who still don't feel safe in their own skin. It takes systems that care more about healing than headlines. If you or someone you know is currently being trafficked, controlled, manipulated, or hurt, please reach out. There's help available. And there is hope. Always. National Human Trafficking Hotline 1-888-37-888. National Domestic Violence Hotline 1-800-799. Safe. RAIN. Sexual Assault Hotline 1-800-656-HOPE. Black Women's Health Imperative www.bhi.org. Therapy for Black Girls www.therapyforblackgirls.com. Let's be clear. Healing is your birthright. You don't need permission to reclaim your joy. You don't need anyone's validation to start again. You are worthy of peace. You are worthy of safety. You are worthy of a life free from fear. We rebuild by loving louder. We rebuild by telling the truth. We rebuild by refusing to let what happened in silence stay in silence. We cannot cover stories like this and just walk away. We cannot hear about women being trafficked, brutalized, discarded, and simply move on to the next trending topic. Because when we move on too fast, we become part of the problem. Silence isn't neutral. Silence is protection. Not for the survivors, but for the predators. So if you're listening right now and you felt angry, disgusted, heavy, or even helpless, good. That means you're still human. That means your heart hasn't been desensitized by the constant flood of abuse, injustice, and headlines. But what you do next, that's what defines this moment. This is your call to action. If you're a parent, talk to your kids. And I don't mean surface talk. I mean the real stuff. Teach them about boundaries, manipulation, power dynamics. Show them what healthy love looks like, not control dressed as care. If you're an educator, use your platform to teach consent, emotional regulation, and media literacy. Equip our youth to spot grooming behaviors, to question toxic role models, and to protect each other. If you're on social media, stop reposting trauma for clicks. Stop glamorizing abusive relationships. Stop supporting artists, influencers, and public figures who have patterns of hurting women and calling it art, lifestyle, or personality. If you work in media, music, law, or entertainment, hold your peers accountable. You know who's dangerous. You've heard the stories. Stop being complicit. If you are a survivor, know this. Your story matters. Whether you've told it or not, whether anyone believed you or not, whether it was last year, last month, or when you were 12 years old. What happened to you was real. And you deserve healing, support, and the right to be whole again. And for all of us, as a collective, as a community, as a culture, this is the moment to decide who we want to be moving forward. Do we want to be the generation that looked away, shrugged our shoulders, and said, "It's not my problem"? Or do we want to be the generation that finally listened, believed, and acted? Cash Out is behind bars, but there are more. There are men still being protected. There are women still being exploited. Thank you for watching. If you found value in today's video, I invite you to take your journey even further with my podcast, Life Points with Ronda, where we dive deep into relationships, personal growth, and the wisdom that helps you thrive. Tune in on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and all major streaming platforms for powerful insights that can transform your life. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more uplifting content like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. Stay connected with me on Instagram, Facebook, and Patreon. Life Points with Ronda. Visit my website at lifepointswithronda.com for exclusive content, coaching, and more. Thank you for your support. Until next time, take care and stay phenomenal.